The war room of the Galactic Coalition was calm, almost serene, as the alien generals gathered around the central holodisplay. They had studied humanity's capabilities for months, reviewed every scrap of intelligence, and meticulously planned their campaign. The fleet they had assembled was vast, with ships from multiple species, all united under the Coalition's banner. Humanity, or Deathworlders, as they had come to be known, was a relatively young species, and while their reputation for survival was noteworthy, the generals saw them as nothing more than a mildly challenging obstacle. Victory was inevitable, it was just a matter of time. "We anticipate the battle will last no more than 3 standard days," one of the lead generals declared confidently. His tone was measured, professional. "Their defenses are spread too thin, and while they have some unique tactical tendencies, nothing will stand against the full might of the Coalition fleet." Around the table, the other generals nodded in agreement. They had fought countless wars across the galaxy, encountering species far more advanced than humanity. Those wars had been drawn out, methodical, with each engagement lasting days, even weeks. They had no reason to believe this battle would be any different. 3 days? Another general mused, leaning back in his chair. "That's assuming they even hold out that long. The humans are known for their chaotic tactics, but chaos has no place in a prolonged engagement. We'll grind them down with precision and discipline." The confidence in the room was palpable. These generals had never known defeat, not in any of their campaigns. Their species hailed from planets where order and stability were the foundation of society. They thrived on structure, on carefully laid plans that allowed no room for error. Their fleets, numbering in the thousands, were organized with such meticulous detail that even a minor deviation from their strategy was unlikely. As the final plans were laid out, the alien generals prepared to initiate the first wave of attacks. Their ships, superior in both firepower and technology, moved into position above the human-controlled sector. On the surface, the humans were scrambling to respond, and the generals watched with quiet amusement as the humans attempted to organize their defenses. It was exactly as they had predicted, disorganized, panicked, and far too slow. The battle, they thought, was already won in every way that mattered. The first strikes were launched, calculated and precise. Coalition ships moved with military precision, firing at key points in the human defensive network. The strategy was simple: break their communications, cripple their infrastructure, and wait for them to falter. 3 days to wear them down, to push them into submission. The humans would fight, of course, but it would be futile in the face of such overwhelming superiority. But something strange happened as the initial skirmishes unfolded. The humans didn't fight back the way the generals expected. Instead of retreating or regrouping in predictable patterns, the humans launched a counteroffensive that was shockingly fast, almost reckless. Their ships, smaller and less advanced, darted through the coalition lines with a kind of chaotic precision that made no sense. They weren't following any known strategic patterns. They were doing something entirely their own. The lead general furrowed his brow as he watched the battle unfold on the holoscreen. "What are they doing?" he muttered. "They're not falling into the trap." Another general leaned in closer to the display, eyes narrowing. "They're moving too quickly. They're not reacting the way we thought they would." At first, the generals assumed it was just luck. The humans had stumbled upon a gap in their defenses, nothing more. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that it wasn't luck, it was something far more dangerous. The humans were adapting, shifting their tactics on the fly in ways the alien generals hadn't anticipated. Their fleet wasn't large, but it was moving with an agility that the coalition ships couldn't match. "They're hitting our flanks," one of the tactical officers reported, his voice tense. "We've lost contact with 3 cruisers." The room fell silent as the generals processed the information. This wasn't how the battle was supposed to go. The humans weren't supposed to be able to strike back with such force, and certainly not this early. The plan had accounted for minor skirmishes, but nothing on this scale. The coalition strategy relied on a slow, deliberate push, a gradual erosion of the enemy's defenses. But the humans weren't giving them the time. They were pushing hard and fast, throwing the coalition fleet into a state of disarray. The lead general straightened, trying to regain control of the situation. Reorganize the formation. Cut off their escape routes and funnel them into the kill zone. But even as the order was given, the humans continued to disrupt the coalition's lines. They weren't following the conventional rules of warfare. They didn't care about maintaining cohesion or playing it safe. Their ships were diving headfirst into enemy territory, targeting key systems and exploiting every weakness in the coalition's strategy. The coalition generals, who had spent weeks perfecting their battle plan, suddenly found themselves on the defensive, struggling to keep up with humanity's seemingly chaotic assault. "This doesn't make sense," one general said, his voice laced with disbelief. "They're outgunned and outnumbered, but they're cutting through our lines like we're the ones caught off guard." "They are Deathworlders," another muttered, his tone grim. "Perhaps we should have taken that more seriously." Deathworlders. The term had been thrown around in the planning stages, but none of the generals had given it much thought. Earth was considered a harsh planet by galactic standards, its environment brutal and unforgiving. But that was just background information, something interesting to note, not something that had factored into the coalition's calculations. Now, though, it seemed that humanity's origin on a death world was more than a curiosity. It was the key to their resilience. The humans weren't fighting like other species. They didn't play by the rules, because their very existence had never been governed by rules. On Earth, survival was a constant battle, and that had forged them into something the coalition hadn't fully understood. Their adaptability, their willingness to take risks that no other species would consider, was what was driving this battle off course. "General," an officer interrupted, "the humans are advancing faster than we anticipated. If this continues, they'll breach the second line of defense within minutes." "Minutes?" The generals exchanged uneasy glances. The plan had been to draw the battle out over days, to wear the humans down through a series of calculated strikes. But at this rate, the battle could be over in a matter of hours, or less. The lead general clenched his fists, struggling to maintain his composure. "We need to regain control. Pull back the forward fleet and—" Before he could finish, another report came through. "We've lost contact with the command ship on the Eastern Front. The humans they're bypassing our defenses entirely." It was impossible. This wasn't how the battle was supposed to go. But as the reports kept coming in, it became clear that the humans weren't just resisting, they were winning. And they were doing it far faster than anyone had thought possible. The alien generals, who had entered this war room with confidence and calm, now found themselves staring at a rapidly collapsing situation. The battle that was supposed to take 3 days was slipping away from them minute by minute. And humanity was just getting started. The moment the humans broke through the second line of defense, the battle shifted in a way the alien generals had never anticipated. Their calm facade was cracking. They had planned for a methodical, drawn-out engagement, a 3-day exercise in wearing down the enemy. But in just a matter of minutes, that plan had unraveled, and now they were scrambling to respond to a situation that no amount of careful strategy could control. The humans, as unpredictable as ever, were not giving them any time to adjust. Their ships darted through the battlefield with shocking speed, exploiting every gap in the coalition's carefully orchestrated formations. Each human vessel was seemingly independent, but there was a clear coordination behind their actions, a chaotic brilliance that the aliens could not grasp. It was as if the humans had read the playbook the coalition had spent months preparing and thrown it into the fire. One of the generals watched, his eyes wide, as the human fleet executed yet another unpredictable maneuver. A squadron of human ships bypassed the coalition's heavy cruisers entirely, diving directly into the heart of the command fleet. It was audacious. It was reckless. And it was working. The coalition forces had been prepared for a slow, grinding war, not for this kind of hyper-aggressive onslaught. They simply weren't equipped to handle it. "They're hitting our command vessels," a tactical officer reported, his voice tinged with disbelief. "They're not even targeting our frontline ships anymore. They're going straight for the leadership." The generals exchanged uneasy glances. This was not how battles were supposed to unfold. The coalition's strategy relied on maintaining a strong command structure, with orders filtering down from the top to ensure precise execution. But the humans had cut straight through that, severing communication lines and leaving entire sections of the fleet without direction. The discipline that had always been the coalition's greatest strength was now its greatest weakness. Without orders, their forces were paralyzed, and the humans were exploiting that hesitation ruthlessly. "They're dismantling us," one general said, the disbelief in his voice now replaced by grim acknowledgement. "This isn't a battle, it's a dissection." Human tactics weren't like anything the coalition had ever seen. They weren't interested in drawing the battle out or grinding down the enemy in a war of attrition. The humans were striking with surgical precision, targeting weak points and shattering the coalition's ability to fight back. What was supposed to be a 3-day engagement had already been reduced to a desperate struggle for survival within minutes. "Send reinforcements to Sector 7, the lead general ordered, trying to regain control of the situation. "We can still." "Sector 7 has already fallen," an officer interrupted, his voice tight with panic. "The humans took it out 5 minutes ago." The lead general's hand clenched into a fist, his jaw tightening as he struggled to keep his composure. Every time they tried to regroup, the humans were already there, hitting them before they could execute their next move. It was as if the humans were always one step ahead, anticipating every order before it was given. There was no time to counter, no time to adjust. "They're using their ships like weapons in a knife fight," another general muttered, staring in disbelief at the display. "They're not just outmaneuvering us, they're cutting us apart." The humans didn't fight like the coalition, and that was becoming painfully clear. The coalition relied on careful coordination, long-range tactics, and slow, calculated engagements. But the humans had taken everything the coalition knew about warfare and turned it on its head. Their ships didn't move in neat, orderly formations. They zigzagged through the battlefield, ignoring conventional wisdom and throwing themselves into the thick of the fight. It wasn't just unconventional, it was madness. Yet somehow it worked. The humans were thriving in the chaos they created, while the coalition forces, trained to handle structured warfare, were falling apart. Every attempt to form a cohesive counterattack was disrupted before it could even begin. Communications were jammed, tactical plans rendered useless, and the carefully organized fleets were being torn to shreds. "They're not giving us time to breathe," a tactical officer said, his voice trembling. "We can't even regroup." In the war room, the generals felt the weight of the situation pressing down on them. They had entered this battle with supreme confidence, certain that their superior technology and strategy would carry the day. But now, as reports of losses flooded in faster than they could process them, they realized they had vastly underestimated humanity. The humans weren't fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting to win, as quickly and decisively as possible, without mercy or hesitation. "We need to pull back," one of the generals suggested, his voice tight with anxiety. "We're too exposed." "No!" the lead general snapped, his pride refusing to let him admit defeat so quickly. "We still have the advantage. They're just—" He cut himself off, struggling to find the right words. How could he explain what was happening? How could he admit that they were losing control of a battle that should have been easy? But the truth was undeniable. The humans had flipped the script entirely. The coalition, so used to long, drawn-out engagements, had no answer for this kind of rapid, aggressive warfare. The humans weren't fighting to survive, they were fighting to end the battle as quickly as possible, and the coalition had no way to stop them. Suddenly, the room fell silent as a new report came in. "General, we've lost contact with the flagship." A collective gasp rippled through the war room. The flagship was the heart of the coalition fleet, the command center from which all orders were issued. If it was gone. "How?" the lead general demanded, his voice cracking with disbelief. "How did they?" "The humans bypassed our defenses and took it out in a single strike," the officer replied, his tone hollow. "It's gone, sir." The weight of the situation crashed down on the generals all at once. The humans had taken out their most important asset in minutes. What was supposed to be a 3-day engagement was rapidly spiraling into total collapse. The flagship was more than just a ship, it was a symbol of the Coalition's power and unity. Without it, their forces were leaderless, scattered, and vulnerable. For the first time, the lead general felt a flicker of doubt. He had been so certain that the Coalition's superior strategy and firepower would win the day. But now, as the battle unfolded before him, he saw the truth: they had gravely miscalculated. The humans weren't just another enemy, they were something else entirely. "Pull back the fleet," he ordered quietly, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "We need to regroup." The alien generals had long prided themselves on their ability to predict the course of battles, to control the flow of combat with calculated precision. But now, that sense of control was gone. In mere minutes, the humans had shredded their expectations, and the carefully constructed plans that had taken months to prepare were falling apart. The humans were not just winning, they were dismantling the entire structure of the battle before the generals could even comprehend what was happening. The human fleet had broken through the final line of defense, and with each passing moment, they were taking more and more control of the battlefield. Their ships moved like predators, weaving between the alien vessels, hitting weak points with devastating accuracy. What baffled the generals wasn't just the humans' audacity, but the efficiency with which they executed every move. They didn't waste time on protracted exchanges of fire or defensive posturing. Every maneuver was designed to end the fight quickly and decisively. "Sir, their fighters are targeting our carrier groups," one of the tactical officers reported, panic creeping into his voice. "They've already disabled 3 of our main supply ships. We can't hold this position much longer." The lead general's expression was grim as he absorbed the information. The Coalition's fleet had relied on those carriers to maintain the long-term engagement they had expected. Without them, they couldn't sustain the battle. The humans had known that, and had struck at exactly the right moment. It was no accident. They had planned this all along, seizing the initiative from the first moment of contact and refusing to let go. "They're not fighting like soldiers," one of the generals muttered, almost to himself. "They're fighting like survivors, like they don't care about the rules of engagement." That was the heart of the problem. The Coalition had expected humanity to fight like every other species they had faced, careful, methodical, and restrained by a need for survival. But the humans were different. They fought as though they had nothing to lose, as if every second counted and there was no time for anything but victory. Their ships were smaller, but they moved with a kind of relentless precision that the Coalition forces couldn't match. And their tactics? Those were beyond anything the generals had ever seen. "They've cut through the eastern flank," another officer reported, his voice trembling. "We've lost contact with all ships in that sector." The lead general's fists clenched at his sides. The pace of the battle was accelerating, spiraling out of control faster than he could keep up. What was supposed to be a slow, grinding siege had turned into a sprint, and the humans were outpacing them at every turn. The Coalition's forces were designed for endurance, for long-term campaigns where attrition wore down their enemies over time. But the humans had no interest in playing that game. They were pushing hard, refusing to give the aliens even a moment to recover. The alien fleet, which had once seemed so vast and imposing, was now scattered and in disarray. Communications between sectors had broken down, and the humans were exploiting every gap, moving with a speed and coordination that the Coalition couldn't counter. Their ships were everywhere, hitting from angles that defied traditional military logic. It was chaos, and the Coalition forces, so dependent on structure, were collapsing under the pressure. "Sir, the humans have breached the command zone," an officer called out. "They're targeting the central communications array." The lead general's eyes widened. If the humans took out the central array, the Coalition's ability to coordinate the remaining forces would be obliterated. Without centralized communication, the fleet would be nothing more than isolated pockets of resistance, easy prey for the human ships that were now dominating the battlefield. "How are they doing this?" one of the younger generals asked, his voice filled with shock. "We're supposed to be the superior force. They're just Deathworlders," another general finished, bitterness creeping into his tone. "That's what we told ourselves. But we were wrong." The truth was becoming clearer by the second. The humans weren't just a random, reckless species from a dangerous planet. They were something else entirely, something the Coalition hadn't been prepared for. Their adaptability, their ability to think on their feet and exploit every opportunity, was unlike anything the aliens had encountered before. While the Coalition had been relying on strategy and brute force, the humans had been playing a completely different game, a game the aliens hadn't even realized they were part of. The lead general knew they were running out of time. Every second they hesitated, the humans advanced further. His fleet was on the verge of being completely cut off, with no way to retreat and no way to regroup. In minutes, not days, the humans had turned the battle on its head, and now it was a fight for survival. "We can't win this," he said quietly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Not the way we're fighting." The admission was painful, but it was the truth. The Coalition's traditional strategies, their reliance on discipline and overwhelming force, were useless against a species that fought like this. The humans weren't following any rules. They weren't waiting for the Coalition to react. They were moving, always moving, never giving the aliens a chance to breathe. "General, what are your orders?" an officer asked, his voice tight with tension. The lead general hesitated, staring at the display where the human ships dominated the screen. There was no victory here, no tactical advantage that would turn the tide. The humans had taken control of the battlefield in minutes, and they were going to win. "All units begin full retreat," he ordered, the words heavy. "We can't hold the line." It was the first time in his career that he had ordered a retreat before the battle was even half fought, and it felt like a betrayal of everything he had been taught. But there was no other option. The Coalition had been outmatched, not in technology or numbers, but in sheer tenacity. The humans had fought with a ferocity that the aliens had never anticipated, and there was no way to stop them. Even as the order was given, it was clear that the retreat would not be easy. The humans had already pushed deep into Coalition territory, and they were not about to let the aliens escape without further losses. The retreat quickly turned into a rout, with ships scrambling to break free from the human onslaught. Communications broke down entirely as captains fought to save their own vessels, abandoning any hope of regrouping with the rest of the fleet. The lead general watched in silence as the battlefield continued to dissolve into chaos. The humans were relentless, pressing their advantage with brutal efficiency. What should have been a 3-day siege had turned into a 15-minute massacre, and the Coalition had no choice but to flee. "They're going to win this," one of the generals said softly, his voice filled with disbelief. The lead general didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth was plain for everyone to see. The humans had won, and they had done it in a fraction of the time anyone had expected. The retreat order had been given, but for the Coalition, retreat was no longer a coherent action. What had started as a calculated withdrawal quickly devolved into panic. Ships scrambled to find escape routes, colliding with one another as the humans pressed their advantage. The Coalition fleet, once so vast and organized, was now a fragmented mess, with no semblance of the control that had existed at the beginning of the battle. The lead general watched in stunned silence. The battle had been over before it had even begun in any real sense. He could hardly believe it. All their planning, their superior numbers, and advanced tactics had amounted to nothing. The humans had torn through them as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience. What was meant to be a 3-day battle of attrition had ended in less than 15 minutes, and the humans were already securing victory across the battlefield. "Sir, our forces are being decimated," an officer reported, his voice shaking with disbelief. "We've lost over 70% of our fleet." 70%. In 15 minutes. The lead general's hands trembled as he tried to process the reality of the situation. How had this happened? How had the humans, whom the Coalition had written off as brash, primitive, and chaotic, managed to dismantle one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy in such a short amount of time? Every assumption they had made about the humans had been wrong. They're just Deathworlders, one of the younger officers whispered, as though trying to rationalize the situation. How could they? But there was no explanation, at least not one the Coalition had been prepared for. The humans had leveraged every advantage they had: speed, unpredictability, and above all, a mindset that the Coalition had failed to anticipate. Humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't follow the same patterns or rules of engagement. Their willingness to adapt to the chaos of battle, to thrive in it, had been their greatest weapon. The general felt the weight of the defeat bearing down on him. He had been a military leader for decades, had seen countless battles, but none like this. He had never faced an enemy that fought with such ruthless efficiency, nor one that showed such disregard for the expectations of traditional warfare. The humans had not just defeated them, they had shattered the very foundation of how the Coalition understood conflict. "General, what are we supposed to do?" one of his subordinates asked, eyes wide with panic. "The fleet is falling apart. We can't hold out against them. There's nowhere to regroup." The general didn't answer right away. There was no way to regroup. The humans had made sure of that. They had cut the Coalition's forces off from one another, isolating them and picking them apart one by one. What had been a powerful, united fleet was now nothing more than scattered remnants, each ship desperately trying to avoid the inevitable. We have to get out of here," the general finally muttered, his voice hollow. "Whatever ships are left, order them to retreat to the nearest safe zone. We need to regroup somewhere far from here." But even as he gave the order, he knew it would be impossible. The humans had left them no room to escape. Their ships, once thought to be inferior, were swarming over the Coalition's remaining forces, blocking off every possible route of retreat. The tactical display showed the human fleet moving like a tide, pressing forward relentlessly. There was no hesitation in their movements, no doubt in their strategy. The humans were completely in control of the battlefield. "Sir, they're closing in on the command ships," another officer reported. "Our escape routes have been blocked. We can't get out." The general's stomach sank. This wasn't just a defeat, it was an annihilation. The humans weren't going to let them escape. This battle, which had started with the expectation of a slow and deliberate engagement, was ending in total destruction. And there was nothing the general could do to stop it. He stared at the screen in front of him, watching as the human ships closed in. It was almost surreal. He had spent his entire career in the military, learning and mastering the art of war. But none of that mattered now. Everything he had been taught, everything he had believed about the strength of the Coalition, was worthless in the face of this new reality. "How did they do this?" he muttered under his breath, his voice filled with quiet despair. "How did we let this happen?" But there was no answer, at least none that would make sense in the context of the Coalition's rigid understanding of warfare. The humans had simply fought in a way that defied everything the Coalition had prepared for. They had taken the battle and flipped it on its head, using their perceived weaknesses, recklessness, unpredictability, as their greatest strengths. The humans weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to end the battle as quickly as possible, and they had succeeded beyond anything the general had thought possible. "General," an officer said softly, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." The general blinked, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. A transmission? From the humans? What could they possibly want now? They had already won. They had already crushed the Coalition's forces beyond recovery. What more was there to say? "Put it through," he ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. The transmission crackled to life, and the general could hear the voice of a human commander, calm and almost casual. "To the Coalition fleet," the voice said. "This is Commander Harris of the Earth Defense Force. Your fleet is finished. We've disabled your ability to fight back. Surrender now, and we'll allow whatever remains of your forces to retreat. Resist, and we'll finish what we've started." The words were spoken with such confidence, such certainty, that the general felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. There was no point in resisting anymore. The humans had already demonstrated their capability, and there was no reason to doubt that they would follow through on their threat. But the most terrifying part wasn't the threat itself, it was the fact that the humans had done all of this in less than 15 minutes. A battle that should have taken days had been reduced to a short, brutal exercise in domination. And the general knew, without a doubt, that this was a message not just for the Coalition, but for the entire galaxy. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and they weren't going to play by anyone else's rules. "Send the message to all remaining ships," the general said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Order them to stand down. There's no point in continuing this." The war room fell into a tense silence as the orders were carried out. The general watched as the human ships pulled back slightly, allowing the few surviving Coalition vessels to make their retreat. The battle was over, and humanity had won. But it wasn't just a victory, it was a statement, one that the Coalition, and the galaxy, would never forget.